But the necklace, like the promise, was no longer for her. His words, clipped and devoid of warmth, still hung in the air between them, more chilling than the sterile minimalist design of their penthouse. It's for the best. But what he couldn't possibly imagine was whose hand she'd be holding when she walked through those ballroom doors later that night. Just minutes ago, it had been filled with Elias Fallner's smooth, rationalizing voice. Each word was a carefully polished stone thrown at Bryony's heart. It wasn't just the pregnancy, which had softened her angles and brought a new, vulnerable curve to her body. It was the look in her eyes, a wounded disbelief. She and Elias had been a team. She had set aside her own promising career to support his meteoric rise, a sacrifice made gladly for the future they were building, for the child she now carried. "It's a business necessity, Bree," he'd said, adjusting the cuffs of his $1,000 shirt. "We need to project a certain image, power, unencumbered energy. Roger Davies himself will be there. We're on the cusp of the big leagues." Unencumbered. The word had caught in her throat, tasting like poison. "Don't be dramatic. You're tired all the time." "The situation," she whispered to the empty room now. "The situation." Katrina was a junior associate at his firm, a woman who was all sharp angles, sharper ambition, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. It wasn't with admiration, but with the predatory gaze of a shark that had scented a path to bigger waters. She'd seen the late-night texts he'd dismissed as urgent project details. Her intuition had screamed, but her love had told it to be quiet. Collapsing onto the heated floor, she let the sobs come deep, ragged sounds of a world breaking apart. It wasn't just the humiliation of the ball. It was the casual cruelty, the dismissal of her as a person, as his wife, as the mother of his child. She was a line item in his life that had become inconvenient, a variable in his equation for success that needed to be temporarily removed. She cried for the plans they had made, the names they had debated for their son, the future that now felt like a cruel fantasy. Each one was a tiny, forgotten promise. Bryony pushed herself up. Her face was blotchy, her eyes raw. It was anger, a cold, clear, diamond-hard fury that began to crystallize in the ruins of her heart. He thought she was weak, an encumbrance, a tired, swollen woman to be hidden away while he and his mistress paraded around, securing his future. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Elias Fallner. He had forgotten the woman who could command a boardroom with a quiet presentation. She walked back into the living area, her steps now steady. Her gaze fell upon her laptop sitting on a side table. An idea, wild and audacious, sparked in her mind. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, armed with nothing but a memory and a sliver of professional pride. Years ago, before she had shelved her career, Bryony had run a small but innovative nonprofit called Urban Canvas, focused on creating sustainable, community-centric green spaces in neglected city areas. She hadn't met the man himself, not in person. The meeting was with his board, but as she was packing up her presentation, a low, calm voice had spoken from the doorway. He was older, with eyes that seemed to see everything, and he was holding her proposal. It was Donovan Knight. He hadn't been on the schedule. He told her he'd watched her presentation via a live feed to his office. "The board is too conservative. They'll fund another hospital wing. It's safer." He handed her his private business card. "When it does, or when you need a partner who understands that a foundation is meant to build the future, not just patch up the present, call this number." Her hands trembled as she pulled the card from a keepsake box in her old desk drawer. The number was stark against the black. This was insane. What would she even say? A future with a mother who did not crumble, who did not hide. A mother who fought back. She cleared her throat. "My name is Bryony Sloan." There was a pause. For a terrifying second, she thought he would have no memory of her, that she would be dismissed as just another crank call. "I remember, Miss Sloan," he said, and she could have wept with relief. Sustainable architecture with a social conscience. I told you the board were fools. Yes, that was me. I was just reviewing the guest list for this ridiculous Starlight Gala I'm being forced to attend tonight. The words came tumbling out. She told him about her husband's cruelty, about Katrina Bell, about being cast aside because her pregnancy was an inconvenience to his ambition. She framed it as a business proposition born of desperation. Mr. Knight, my life has just been fundamentally restructured. I need to secure a future for my child, and I can't do that by hiding. I need to relaunch my work. The Starlight Gala is for children's hope. Not as a victim, but as the founder of the Sloan Initiative. Well, my future just started today. She had laid her entire broken soul bare. I despise bullies, and I detest men who mistake kindness for weakness. Your husband is making a grave error tonight, but his error will be your opportunity. It's dreadfully boring, and I was planning on making a token appearance and leaving, but you have just given me a reason to stay. Be ready in 90 minutes. My car will be downstairs. Bryony was stunned into silence. And Bryony, Donovan Knight added, his voice low and firm. Tonight, we are not just attending a ball. We are making a statement. The line went dead. The despair that had crippled her only an hour ago was gone, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. She was not just going to the ball. 90 minutes. It was an impossible timeline that paradoxically made everything possible. Bryony's first move was to walk into her and Elias's expansive walk-in closet. On one side hung Elias's meticulously organized rows of bespoke suits and designer shirts. On the other, her own wardrobe, which had recently trended towards comfortable maternity wear and elegant but safe choices. Her gaze landed on a garment bag at the very back, a purchase from a year ago she'd never had the nerve to wear. She had bought it on a whim, a ghost of the audacious woman she used to be. The silk was cool against her feverish skin. It fit, not perfectly, but beautifully. The high waist sat just above her baby bump, cascading down in a waterfall of rich fabric that made her look not hidden or swollen, but regal, ethereal. The deep V-neckline was daring, but the overall effect was one of commanding elegance. She pushed them aside, her hand closed around a piece her grandmother had left her, a stunning Art Deco necklace of platinum and onyx. As she worked, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A team is on its way to your service en trance. They are from me. Let them in. Standing outside were a man and a woman, both dressed in discreet black. They radiated a quiet, formidable competence. Mr. Knight sent us. My colleague George is here for security and to ensure your smooth exit. Bryony was floored. She led Lena to the master bathroom, a space that now felt like a battleground being repurposed into a command center. Lena worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She assessed Bryony's face, her gown, her jewelry. We are celebrating it. She used shades of gold and bronze on Bryony's eyes, making them look luminous and fierce. She sculpted her cheekbones, gave her a lip color that was a shade deeper than natural, suggesting a woman who was not to be trifled with. Her hair was swept up into a complex but graceful chignon that showcased the formidable lines of the onyx necklace and the elegant column of her neck. As Lena put the finishing touches on her, Bryony looked in the mirror. The tear-stained, broken woman from a few hours ago was gone. In her place stood a queen. She looked like a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who was standing on the precipice of her own life, not falling from the edge of someone else's. Meanwhile, George, the silent security man, had done a quiet sweep of the apartment. He spoke into a discreet communications device in his wrist. No press. Extraction. Asset. A world away from Elias's sphere of flashy sales pitches and fragile ego. Just as Lena packed up her kit, Bryony's phone buzzed again. It was him and Katrina posing in front of a mirror. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a smug, triumphant look on his face. The diamond necklace, her necklace, was around Katrina's throat. The caption read, "Wish you were here. Having a great time." The cruelty was so blatant, so juvenile, it was almost laughable. A month ago, it would have shattered her. An hour ago, it would have made her sick. He was a boy playing king, completely unaware that a true power was about to enter the game. She didn't reply. She simply deleted the message. "You look magnificent," she said. And for the first time, a genuine smile touched her lips. "Go get what is yours." Bryony walked out of the apartment she had shared with Elias, not looking back. The driver, also in a discreet suit, held the door open. As they pulled out into the city traffic, Bryony finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, but it was now tempered with a steely resolve. The car did not head straight for the Grand Plaza Hotel, where the gala was being held. Instead, it pulled up to a discreet, ivy-covered brownstone in the West Village. George opened her door. "Mr. Knight will join you here. He prefers to avoid the main entrance scrum." He wasn't handsome in the conventional, polished way Elias was. His was a face carved by intelligence and experience. His gray-streaked hair added to his air of authority. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, assessed her in an instant. A slow smile of approval spread across his face. "Ms. Sloane," he said, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. "I intend to," she replied, her voice steady. "Good, because we are about to lay the first brick." He led her inside, not to a drawing room, but to a high-tech office. A massive screen on the wall showed a live feed of the gala's entrance. The red carpet was a frenzy of flashing cameras and reporters. "Know the terrain before you enter the field. There, that's Roger Davies, your husband's boss, a man who respects only two things, money and power. He is currently talking to Senator Michelson, a key figure on the Urban Development Committee. He was giving her a battlefield briefing. He was treating her like a general, and he was her strategist." They watched for a few moments as Elias and Katrina made their grand entrance. The cameras swarmed them. Elias was in his element, preening, soaking in the attention. "He's peacocking," Donovan observed, a note of disdain in his voice. "He believes this is his moment of triumph. He has no idea that he is merely the opening act." His expression was serious. "Now, for our terms of engagement. You are my business partner. We are here to announce the relaunch of your vision, backed by the full weight of the Knight Foundation. I am investing in you. The revenge is simply a serendipitous byproduct." He picked up a sleek black portfolio from his desk and handed it to her. "A preliminary proposal for the Sloan Initiative. I had my team draft it this past hour. It outlines a seed funding of $5 million to begin feasibility studies on 3 of your original urban canvas projects. It is real. It is effective immediately." Bryony opened the portfolio. Tears pricked her eyes. "Just succeed. That will be thanks enough." He glanced at his watch. "They have just begun the cocktail hour. The key players are all inside. Shall we?" He offered her his arm again. This time when she took it, it felt different. It was no longer the arm of a rescuer. It was the arm of a partner, an ally. As they walked towards the door, Bryony felt the last vestiges of the victim fall away from her. She was not Elias Faulkner's discarded wife. She was Bryony Sloane, founder of the Sloan Initiative, and she was about to make her entrance. The Grand Plaza's ballroom was a testament to obscene wealth. Chandeliers dripping with crystals the size of fists hung from a gilded ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over the city's elite. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the distant strains of a string quartet. This was Elias Faulkner's natural habitat, the glittering pond in which he was determined to be the biggest fish. And for the first hour, he was. With Katrina Bell on his arm, a sparkling accessory that validated his sense of virility and power, Elias moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a master salesman. He shook hands with bankers, laughed with tech bros, and shared a conspiratorial whisper with a city councilman. Katrina, for her part, played the role of the adoring partner flawlessly. She laughed at the right moments, touched his arm with possessive reverence, and angled her body so the stolen necklace caught the light for every society photographer. "Elias, darling, Roger Davies is looking over," Katrina murmured, her voice a purr. "He's with Senator Michelson. This is your chance." Elias's heart gave a little flutter of ambition. Davies was the silver-haired kingmaker of Fallner and Davies, a man whose approval he craved with a desperate hunger. He straightened his bow tie, plastered on his most confident smile, and steered Katrina towards them. "Roger, Senator," Elias boomed, extending a hand. "A magnificent evening for a worthy cause." Roger Davies, a man with eyes like chips of granite, gave him a curt nod. "Fallner, good of you to come." "And this is," his gaze flickered over Katrina, appraising and dismissive. "Katrina Bell," Elias said smoothly. "One of our brightest rising stars at the firm." "I see," Davies said, his tone suggesting he saw a great deal. But before the awkward silence could curdle, a sudden hush fell over the section of the ballroom nearest the grand entrance. The low hum of conversation faltered. Heads began to turn, one by one, like dominoes falling in a line. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, growing from a murmur to a palpable buzz. Every phone that had been discreetly tucked away was suddenly raised, cameras pointing towards the arched doorway. Elias, annoyed at the interruption, turned to see what the commotion was about, and then his world stopped. Framed in the magnificent archway, bathed in the light of the chandeliers, stood Bryony. His Bryony. But it was not the Bryony he had left crying in their penthouse. This was not the tired, comfortable woman he had deemed not event-ready. This was a goddess. The emerald green of her gown was a slash of vibrant life in a sea of black tuxedos and glittering but safe dresses. The onyx at her throat was a declaration of war. Her pregnancy was not a flaw to be hidden, but a source of radiant power, making her seem both formidable and divine. She was breathtaking. And she was holding the hand of Donovan Knight. Not just standing next to him, not on his arm in a polite, formal gesture. Her hand was held firmly, protectively, in his. It was a gesture of profound intimacy and partnership that screamed volumes more than a simple public appearance. Donovan Knight, the billionaire phantom, the man who never attended these events for more than a fleeting moment, was standing there looking at Bryony with an expression of deep, undisguised admiration. Elias's smile froze on his face, a rictus of horror. The blood drained from his head, leaving a roaring sound in his ears. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. How did she even know Donovan Knight? Katrina's grip on his arm tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his bicep. "Elias, what the hell is that?" she hissed, her voice tight with panic. "That's your wife." Roger Davies's granite eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He looked from Elias's shocked face to the radiant vision at the door and back again. The contempt that had been simmering just below the surface of his expression now bloomed into full-blown disdain. "Fallner," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You have some explaining to do." But Elias couldn't speak. He could only watch as Donovan Knight led Bryony into the room. The crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. The people Elias had been so desperate to impress were now tripping over themselves to catch Knight's eye, their gazes flicking from the billionaire to the stunning woman at his side, raw curiosity and admiration on their faces. The string quartet seemed to falter. The society photographers who had been content snapping pictures of B-list celebrities and wannabes now swarmed towards the entrance, their flashes creating a blinding, strobing wall of light. Donovan guided Bryony towards the center of the room, his hand never leaving hers. He moved with an unhurried, gravitational pull, the true center of power in the ballroom. He paused to greet Senator Michelson, completely ignoring Elias and Roger Davies, who stood frozen just a few feet away. "Senator," Donovan said, his voice carrying easily in the now quieter room. "A pleasure. I want to introduce you to my new partner. This is Ms. Bryony Sloan, the founder of the soon-to-be-relaunched Sloan Initiative." He used her maiden name. The cut was so deep, so precise, Elias felt it like a physical blow. Senator Michelson, a man Elias had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months, beamed at Bryony. "Ms. Sloan, an absolute honor. Donovan has spoken of nothing else for the past week. He says your vision for sustainable urban development is revolutionary. We must talk." Elias's mind fractured. Spoken of nothing else for the past week. This wasn't a last-minute arrangement. This was a plan, a coordinated, strategic demolition of his entire world. He finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic sound. "Bryony." She turned to him, her eyes, luminous and powerful, met his. There was no hatred in them, no anger, just a calm, cool pity that was infinitely more devastating. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, a minor obstacle she had already mentally cleared from her path. "Elias," she said, her voice even. "I don't believe you've been introduced to my business partner, Mr. Donovan Knight." Donovan turned his gaze on Elias, and for the first time, Elias understood the difference between being rich and being powerful. Elias's wealth was a performance. Donovan's power was a fundamental state of being. Knight's blue eyes were like ice. "Mr. Faulkner," Donovan said, his voice a quiet blade. "I believe you are acquainted with Ms. Sloan." He glanced down at Katrina, his eyes sweeping over the diamond necklace. "A lovely piece. I trust the original owner won't be wanting it back." Katrina flushed a deep, mottled red, her hand instinctively flying to her throat. In that one sentence, Donovan Knight had branded her a thief in front of the most influential people in New York. Her social currency, so carefully curated, had just been incinerated. Before Elias could stammer out a response, the gala's host, a famous news anchor, stepped up to the main microphone on the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, it is time for our main event, the Starlight Auction." A wave of relief washed over Elias. The auction. This was his chance to recover. He was planning to bid on the headline item, the naming rights to a new pediatric wing at the city hospital. A splashy, 7-figure donation would put him back in the spotlight, show his power, and erase this humiliation. The bidding started. It quickly climbed past 500,000, then 1 million. Finally, it was down to 2 bidders, Elias and a rival real estate developer. The room watched, enthralled. 1.5 million, Elias yelled, his voice strained, desperate to reclaim his territory. His rival hesitated, then shook his head, conceding. A smattering of applause broke out. Elias felt a sliver of his bravado return. He glanced at Roger Davies, hoping to see a flicker of restored respect. Davies was watching, but his face was unreadable. 1.5 million going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. 5 million, a calm voice stated from the center of the room. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. All heads swiveled back to Donovan Knight. He hadn't even raised his hand. He had simply spoken. The auctioneer was flustered. I have $5 million from Mr. Donovan Knight." Elias felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't compete with that. He was finished. But Donovan wasn't done. He held up a hand for silence. "And," he announced, his voice resonating with authority, "the Knight Foundation will, of course, be funding the new pediatric wing, but my $5 million bid tonight is for something else." It is the initial seed money to launch a vital new enterprise I am proud to be partnering with, an initiative that embodies the spirit of tonight's gala, investing in a better future for our children." He turned and smiled at Bryony, a smile of genuine pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, this donation officially launches the Sloan Initiative, under the brilliant leadership of its founder, Bryony Sloan." The room exploded in applause, louder and more genuine than any before. It wasn't just applause for a generous donation. It was the sound of a new star being born. Roger Davies was clapping, a slow, calculating smile now on his face as he looked at Bryony with newfound respect. Senator Michelson was patting her on the shoulder. The city's power players were surrounding her, congratulating her, wanting a piece of her. She was the center of the universe. And Elias Faulkner was a ghost standing on the edge of the void, watching the life he had thrown away being crowned. Katrina had already vanished from his side, slipping away into the crowd like the wraith she was. He was utterly, devastatingly alone. Bryony caught his eye one last time across the crowded room. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph or malice. It was a nod of dismissal. A final goodbye. Then she turned back to her new life, her hand held securely in Donovan Knight's, her face illuminated by the brilliant, blinding light of her own future. The fallout from the Starlight Gala was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. By the time the last of the champagne had been drunk and the limousines had spirited away the city's elite, Elias Faulkner's social and professional life lay in smoldering ruins. The story was simply too delicious, too perfectly archetypal for the high society ecosystem to ignore. He left the ball alone, a phantom drifting through the dregs of a party that had only hours before felt like his coronation. Katrina had texted him a single, venomous message. "You're a fraud. Lose my number." Before he'd even made it to the valet. The brutal finality of it was like a slap. His so-called friends, the men and women whose favor he had so carefully cultivated, now averted their eyes, melting into the dispersing crowd whenever he approached. The chill was absolute, a social permafrost from which he knew there would be no thaw. The drive back to the penthouse was a surreal journey through a city that no longer felt like his own. The towering, brilliantly lit skyscrapers that had always filled him with a sense of ownership and ambition now seemed to mock him, their lights like a million judgmental eyes. He was an outsider looking in, a ghost haunting his own life. He let himself into the apartment, and the silence that greeted him was a physical weight. It was no longer the serene, minimalist quiet he had curated as a status symbol. It was the profound, suffocating silence of a tomb. Every polished surface, every piece of designer furniture seemed to reflect his colossal failure. He walked through the space, his footsteps echoing unervingly on the marble floors. He half expected to see Bryony curled on the sofa, waiting for him with tears and recriminations. The confrontation he had dreaded now felt like a luxury he would be denied. The apartment was empty. A quick, frantic search of their walk-in closet revealed the first clue that this had been more than a spur-of-the-moment act of defiance. Her most cherished personal items were gone, the Art Deco necklace, a few key pieces of clothing, a box of personal keepsakes from her old desk. This wasn't just a reaction. It was an evacuation. She had been planning her exit while he was preening for his mistress. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. He hadn't just misjudged her mood. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he was married to. He collapsed onto the edge of their perfectly made bed, the bed they would never share again, and stared at his phone, watching the first tendrils of the story snake their way through social media. The humiliation was just beginning. The next morning, his fears were realized in spectacular fashion. The city's most influential and feared society blogger, Penelope Vance, published her recap of the gala. Her column, The Vance Verdict, was required reading for anyone who was anyone, and she had taken to her subject with the vicious glee of a master butcher. The headline was a masterpiece of schadenfreude, Knight's new dame, billionaire back spurned wife in gala power play for the ages. Elias's hands trembled as he read the prose on his tablet, the coffee he'd just brewed turning to acid in his stomach. While the Borscht Belt comedians say, "Take my wife, please," real estate hotshot Elias Fallner took the adage a bit too literally last night, the column began. He arrived at the Starlight Gala with a tragically overdressed associate, Miss Katrina Bell, clinging to his arm like shrink wrap. Ms. Bell wore a diamond necklace that sources say bore a startling resemblance to one Mr. Fallner had recently purchased for his expectant wife. A bold choice, to be sure, but the real drama began when the doors swept open to reveal the very wife he'd left at home, the radiant and regal Bryony Sloane. Penelope Vance went on to describe Bryony's entrance in breathless detail, calling her gown a column of emerald defiance and her demeanor the serene calm of a woman who knows she's already won. The partnership with Donovan Knight was presented not as a date, but as a strategic alliance of staggering proportions. The worst part was the description of the auction. Mr. Fallner, in a desperate bid to reclaim a sliver of his dignity, engaged in a chest-thumping bidding war for the naming rights to a hospital wing. It was a pathetic spectacle, like a poodle barking at a lion. And then the lion roared. Donovan Knight, with 2 words and a $5 million bid, didn't just win the auction. He publicly reallocated Mr. Fallner's wife's destiny, anointing her the head of a new Knight-backed initiative. One has rarely witnessed such a complete and utter public vivisection. By the end of the night, Mr. Fallner was left with nothing but a cancelled check and the ghost of a career. His phone rang, shrill and demanding. It was Roger Davies's assistant. "Mr. Davies would like to see you in his office. Now." The tone was arctic, promising an execution. The walk from the elevator to Davies's office was a gauntlet of shame. Heads ducked behind computer monitors. Conversations ceased as he passed. He was a dead man walking. When he entered the top-floor office, the view of Central Park was obscured by drawn blinds, plunging the room into a corporate twilight. Davies was standing by the window, his back to the door. "I built my reputation and the reputation of this firm on 2 principles, Fallner," Davies began, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Strength and foresight. I expect my senior partners to embody those same principles, to project them, to live them." He finally turned, and his face was a mask of cold fury. "Last night, you showed neither. You showed catastrophic weakness by allowing your messy personal life to explode in the most public forum imaginable, making yourself, and by extension this firm, a laughingstock." He slapped a copy of the Financial Times onto his expansive mahogany desk. The sidebar headline was stark: "Donovan Knight backs Sloan Initiative, shaking up urban development sector." "But that's not your greatest sin," Davies continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Your greatest sin was a complete, unforgivable, and bankrupting lack of foresight. Donovan Knight doesn't make investments. He builds kingdoms. He alters landscapes. And you fool, you handed him a queen. You had a direct, intimate line to a woman he clearly values. A woman of vision, a woman who is now his strategic partner. And you were too blind, too arrogant, too stupid to see her worth. You didn't just fail to recognize a valuable asset. You actively discarded it. You made us look like we can't recognize value when it's sleeping in our own goddamn bed." The termination was swift and merciless. He was to clear out his desk by noon. There was no negotiation, no severance package beyond the contractual minimum. He was a liability, an infected limb being amputated before the gangrene could spread. For Bryony, the days following the gala were a whirlwind of a different sort. Her phone didn't stop ringing, but the calls were from architects she'd long admired, city planners, journalists from national publications, and even an old professor from graduate school. "I always knew you had it in you, Bryony," he'd said, his voice brimming with pride. "You just needed the right foundation." She realized with a startling clarity that her value had always been there, recognized by those who knew what to look for. It had just been dormant, overshadowed by Elias's blinding ambition. True to his word, Donovan was a partner, not a savior. He arranged a meeting 2 days after the gala, not in a stuffy boardroom, but at a bright, airy loft in Soho with exposed brick walls and massive, sun-drenched windows. A temporary headquarters, he said, gesturing around the empty space. Think of it as a blank canvas. Your canvas. Bryony walked through the loft, her hand resting on her stomach. She could feel the potential of the space. The light, the energy, it felt like her future. It's perfect, she breathed. This is your vision, Bryony, he told her, his tone serious as they stood looking out over the bustling streets below. My foundation will provide the resources, the legal team, the financial advisors, the PR infrastructure. They are tools for you to use. I am not your boss. I am your ally, your first investor. Your success is the only return I'm interested in. His respect was a balm on the wound of Elias's dismissal. He saw her mind, her talent, her resilience, and he valued it. A week after the gala, a legal courier arrived at the penthouse while Elias was in the midst of the humiliating task of packing his bespoke suits and expensive trinkets into cardboard boxes. The courier delivered a crisp manila envelope. Inside were divorce papers. They were filed on the grounds of infidelity and irreconcilable differences. The language was cold and efficient. Bryony was not asking for the penthouse or for a punitive settlement. The papers outlined a simple, clean break. She was reclaiming her maiden name, taking only her personal effects and a small inheritance from her grandmother. She was also requesting a fair and structured child support agreement to be placed in a trust for their son, managed by a neutral third party. There was no angry letter, no final dramatic confrontation. Just the cold, clean paperwork of a life being surgically excised from his. He slumped against a stack of boxes, the papers trembling in his hand. The lack of emotion was the most damning indictment of all. It told him that he was no longer worth her anger. He was simply a chapter she had finished reading and was now closing for good. The seasons turned. The city shifted from the crisp, golden light of autumn to the deep, biting freeze of winter. Elias's world, once so expansive, had shrunk to the size of a prison cell. He couldn't find a job at any reputable firm in Manhattan. The story of the gala had branded him. He was eventually forced to take a junior position at a small, second-rate development company in New Jersey, a soul-crushing commute to a job that was a shadow of his former life. He sold the penthouse at a loss to cover his mounting legal fees and moved into a sterile, soulless apartment complex that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Bryony, meanwhile, blossomed. Her pregnancy progressed, and her inner radiance seemed to intensify with each passing week. The Sloan Initiative was no longer just an idea. It was a vibrant, growing organization. She hired a small, brilliant team, including a trusted colleague from her old urban canvas days, and their first project, transforming a set of abandoned railway tracks in the Bronx into an elevated greenway for a low-income community, was already garnering national attention and praise. 3 months after the gala, on a clear, cold morning, Bryony gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Julian. Donovan was the first person she called after her parents. He arrived at the hospital not with a flood of extravagant gifts, but with a simple, beautiful bouquet of white roses and a look of genuine warmth in his eyes. He held the baby with a surprising, gentle confidence, looking down at the small, perfect face with a quiet smile. He had never had children of his own, and in that moment, looking at Bryony and her son, he felt a connection he never had and never could. "Donovan," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." He met her gaze, his own blue eyes gentle and full of a profound warmth. "Bryony," he replied, his voice low and sincere. "I should be thanking you. You reminded me what it feels like to build something that truly matters, not just something that's big." A comfortable, promising silence settled between them. A silence filled not with emptiness, but with unspoken possibility. The future was unwritten. But for the first time in a very long time, Bryony Sloan was holding the pen, and the pages were bright, clean, and entirely hers to fill. Her son kicked a strong, steady beat against her hand. The insistent, beautiful rhythm of a new life, her new life, about to begin. In the end, this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a story about reclamation. Bryony Sloan didn't just get even. She got everything. She reclaimed her name, her career, her strength, and her future, transforming a moment of profound betrayal into a foundation for a life of purpose. It's a powerful reminder that our lowest moments do not have to define us. Sometimes, the demolition of the life we thought we wanted is the necessary first step to building the one we were always meant to have. True power isn't about the applause you receive in a crowded room, but the quiet, unshakable value you build within yourself. If Bryony's journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of resilience to turn the tables on injustice, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of karma, justice, and empowerment. Click the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of inspiration. Thank you for listening.